So I mentioned that we're particularly interested where there's potential for open collaboration around RegTech solutions and around financial services firms working together and working with a range of providers. So I thought it would be helpful to kind of unpack how realistic that is as a starter for 10. So what are some of the, I guess, what's the business case for open collaboration in the UK markets? What are some of the benefits that you foresee of that more open approach? And what are some of the risks and challenges that we might face? So I might ask you to open up on that, Diana, please.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. So I guess one of the points that you were mentioning before, what's interesting when it comes to regulation is that there's a lot of things in the regulation that is not necessarily a competitive advantage. And I would say that what we see from our clients is that we get asked more and more, well, so how do you, when we do an implementation effectively, how does someone else does it? Not necessarily per name, but more this sense of understanding that we get asked the same questions by other clients gives them a lot of reassurance that this is how everyone is struggling with certain points and how they can sort it out as well. So I think that in regulation, it's very different than probably the rest of a bank in the sense that you can really look at an environment where banks are getting together to maybe, share more information in order to compete better on the piece that can actually be different from one bank to the other.
And how do we overcome that? There is, I agree with you, there is the opportunity there, but there's still a degree of kind of competitive inertia that tends to creep in. How do we overcome some of that, do you think? Do you think the business case is clear enough? Do you think the benefits are clear enough?
I think, yeah. I mean, what we have found, the way we've designed our technology is that at some point there will be the opportunity for more forums and more of these questions to be asked with each other. So I think it's interesting because whilst we see there is a lot of demand for this intel, effectively, the way practically they've been comfortable to do these questions so far is really through like a centralized approach. So asking us questions that then get answered from what we see in other banks. I think open source approaches, we're big fans of that. We have this project that we started with the European Commission on open standards for regulatory financial data definitions. And what's interesting is that in technology, this GitHub collaboration, open source projects are actually quite popular. This is how technology and the best of technology is built. So we think platforms that can allow this kind of interaction factually, whether it's in the form of forums or chat rooms, that maybe can be anonymous to start with, so that banks can feel comfortable to ask certain questions and then get certain amount of feedback from the rest of the industry. Maybe having the regulators interacting in some of those questions as well can be quite beneficial, because I'm sure you guys get asked all sorts of questions, one bank at a time, or if maybe that was more an open forum kind of approach, it could be much more useful. But the anonymity bit, I think initially can be a practical way to get it started, I would say.
Yeah, and I'd add in, I think it's consistent with actually how you have to engage with fintech as a whole. So, I mean, at Barclays, our experience has been, you'll see us in the fintech market under the brand of Rise. We understand that to get traction and to attract the right entrepreneurs and the right capabilities, you can't go in with an approach of saying, hey, come and work with us and we're going to stick our arm around you and suck you into the beast. There's also just a reality, which is, I think, post-financial crisis, we're in a different world. And so whereas in the past banks could look for a piece of talent and confidently say, I'm going to hire that talent in and get that capability and I'm going to build it myself, well, we neither have the capital, necessarily the brand attractiveness to those kind of entrepreneurs and that capability anymore. So the recognition is also that, okay, so we still need that capability. We still want to access those brains, that energy, that capability. How do you do that? Create the right environment where those people will hopefully work with you around solving problems. But also looking, I think this applies to regulatory as well as the engine rooms of banks overall, which is, it's very unusual where, for example, Barclays comes up with a business problem or problem statement where we aren't really a proxy for about 10 or 12 or 15 or 100 other banks who have exactly the same problem. So if you can articulate that problem well, be it in, like I say, includes the RegTech space, if you can articulate that well and identify those who have the brains and the capability they'll soon get the money, and you're actually attracting external capital, be it intellectual capital, be it financial, to solve a problem that is a problem in common. And it tends not to be in an area of huge competitive advantage.
Yeah, I would, firstly, good morning. I kind of concur with that view. I suppose one of the challenges around collaboration across the industry has to be the ability to collaborate within the organisation in the first place. So I think we probably, some of you, if you do work in large organisations or banks, have friends who work in silos from other parts of an organisation. And if you're going to work collaboratively across an industry, part of the starting point has to be collaborate within your own organisation. If you can get that right, you can work out how best to bring the right talent to the table when you start collaborating across the industry. And I think that means collaborations industry-wide move a lot faster. Secondly, I'd probably say that picking out a few of the areas where, well, I think you highlighted one, for example, KYC and AML. You start to talk about things like regulatory reporting. Areas where there aren't distinct competitive advantages, but actually the cost of complying or the cost of executing is high. Therefore, if you can find common ways of doing this in a more effective way, the competitive advantage you can then seek by addressing that across an industry is actually it frees up the cost of executing that task. And that frees up capital to invest in other innovations within an organisation. And how a business then chooses to deploy that capital into what innovations is potentially a source of differential competitive advantage over another. So I think my first challenge, and one of the experiences I've had of working with fintechs in the last many years, and in commercial and corporate banking before, is if you can put a team of people together with a common goal, forgetting where they came from, and they organise themselves around delivering an outcome, it's amazing what you can achieve. But first you need to get everyone to see that common goal. If they can see that industry-wide or within an organisation, my experience tells me you can collaborate.
Yeah, just one comment also, which where I completely agree with you. One of the things which is really important is that basically fintechs allow big corporations to do things that they cannot do, right? Because of process, because of all their internal procedures and so on. And when you start with a small company that has no legacy code, then basically they can move much, much faster in doing maybe the same capability that you could do internally in a larger organization, but they can do it much faster. And this is where the collaboration is really exciting, because the collaboration between the expertise of the large corporation in the business statement or the problem statement and the speed at which a small team or a fintech can actually do to execute is usually like mind-blasting. And this is certainly the thing that excites us.
So there's clearly a lot of positivity and interest in these more collaborative approaches, but I've lost track of the number of RegTech providers I've met who tell me, I know exactly who clients 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6 are, because the use case is really clear. There's an industry-wide problem I'm working on. Everyone identifies that this is an issue that needs solving and for which technology can play a role, but I'm still struggling to secure client 1. No one is prepared to make that first step and that first investment into me, and everyone in line wants to see some track record, wants to see someone else having taken the first mover risk. What do you think institutions like your own, or indeed the startups themselves and the innovators themselves, can do to try and overcome that worry, that risk inertia that creeps in at the point of investment? It's one thing to bring them into an innovation lab, is another to then deploy it directly into production, into your systems. So how do we overcome some of those issues?
Shall I try that one first? So I think possibly Mariano Belinki was here yesterday from our Innoventures Fund. So we are actively investing in fintech firms at the moment, looking at fintech and regtech, data, big data, anything in the area that could help us improve our efficiency as an organisation or achieve a competitive edge in key areas of the market. And Santander Innoventures was the most active corporate VC globally, I think, in the last 12 months. So actually there's evidence that if the right people come forward, you can see how you can change your organisation. We are investing, and we are then acting on that investment within our domestic market in the UK, but equally other markets as well. I guess making the decision to invest is one thing. Actually then turning a proposition from a company you invested in into a live proposition in the market is another. We've done that, proven it can be done in a very short space of time, and delivered working capital loan solutions into the UK market for small businesses in less than probably 8 to 9 months from first conversation and investment with the fintech firm Cabbage from the US to actually customers receiving working capital loans through the platform. So again, if you put a group of people together from the bank and the fintech firm with a common goal, and they work in a different way to banks have traditionally worked, so in a more agile, with a more agile methodology, they can deliver an outcome. I suppose if I think about something more recently, there's some of my colleagues in the audience today that were part of your hackathon back in November. There's some smart reg work underway, picking up on just the points you raised earlier around machine-readable code, so the FCA handbook, codified in a way that enables you to execute a smart contract and effectively free up the cost and the ability to evidence your compliance with that point of code by providing cryptographic access. So there's an area there where you can, if you spot an opportunity to prove a proof of concept, you can put a group of people together again and test that it works. And at the moment, we're collaborating with the FCA and with UCL and potentially with others on how we can actually prove that point. And I guess if you can get to that stage where you've got some evidence to back up a proof of concept can be done, others will come to you and look to do the same. What I'd probably argue to start with is that we can't work with everyone. And I think what it does require at times is quite a candid view at a point in time to say, that's a great piece of technology, but it's not for us at the moment. We're focused on this piece, and then we'll move to the next one. So don't stretch yourself too far, would be my view.
Nick, I think the phrase, I think people use, I don't know if they still use it, no one was ever fired for hiring IBM. That's the problem in a bank, is the cultural transformation that needs to go on to allow people to feel they have the ability to progress solutions with younger, more agile companies as the challenge. And so in that space, one of the reactions that I think you're seeing across a number of financial institutions is where we had a focus on startup, we're now also putting a lot of focus on the scale up of companies. So how you can actually take something from being a great solution, proven typically in either a test environment or in a small part of the institution, and how you can really scale that and accept the risk on that and do those pieces. You put money into those programs. And then actually one of the big learnings I got out of the last tech sprint on money and mental health was you won't find a bank in the UK, I don't think you'll find many banks in the UK anyway, where you can't get sort of disability access into the branch. And so people will spend the money and they will make the conversions, and sometimes they're kind of expensive and weird conversions that I've made such that there is accessibility into the branch. You then look at mental health and understand the scale of the challenges there in our communities. And the conclusion that I sort of came to out of that was it's not that there's a lack of willing, there's sometimes a lack of understanding. And if you can really lift the understanding of what are the solutions being built for RegTech, how it fulfills the intent of the regulator as well as the rules of the regulator, and then how it helps you as the bank to do better, then a lot of those obstacles fall away.
I'll let the banks speak.
Well, I think one of the things which is really interesting is when you start working on certain capabilities, some capabilities will have to be done by RegTech companies or FinTech companies, okay? So there, I mean, in our experience, what we do is we evaluate which are the FinTechs and the RegTech companies we want to work for. We do a POC, and then we will choose one of them. So yes, I mean, there can only be one at the end, right? Mm-hmm. But we do try to work with them. I think one of the things which can be difficult in large enterprises, in large organizations like the one I work with, is that there will be always some antibodies internally that will say, oh, well, we could do it internally, we could do it ourselves. And the thing to understand is that there is a difference of cost and speed in delivering this. And that's where I come back to my earlier statement, that basically a small company can act much faster than any other. The other thing too is that, I mean, depending on the company, the size of the RegTech company, you know, it may be quite small. So we do have, as a larger organization, we have to foster them, take care of them, make sure that they can grow and that they're not going to fall over while they're doing the work that we want them to do for us, right? So all that can be like help throughout either the legal aspects, the contractual aspects, the license agreements, working with them also how basically to minimize the risk both on their side and on our side to in case something happens, and make sure that we don't hinder them either in terms of getting new contracts and getting the business to grow. So one of the really interesting part is that as a larger enterprise, we can actually help the companies to grow, get other businesses with our competitors, but they are not competing against us in this segment. I mean, reg is something that every bank has to do, right? And we all have to do it well.
So from the entrepreneur's perspective, I guess there's two things that you have to always really keep in mind. So the first one is that when it comes to RegTech and actually FinTech that sells to banks, you're really talking about B2B, it's enterprise sales, and that has on its own a whole life cycle and enterprise cycle effectively that you need to be very aware when you start a company in that space. But I don't think it's more difficult than doing consumer kind of sales. You know, people have different, from an entrepreneurial perspective, you have a different journey, and it has its own hurdles. But I do like quite a lot the approach of doing a sell into a big enterprise, if that's basically what you decided to do from a business perspective. So I think that one thing is the reality that when it comes to RegTech, specifically, you are talking about enterprise sales, and whether you're Dell or IBM, your sales cycle is quite long. So then you start looking at the fact that a good new tech company can do these point solutions and actually be really cheap R&D for a bank, right? And so this is kind of the points you guys are touching on. And so if a bank really looks at it from that perspective, there's a lot of benefits for everyone, because then you can start collaborating, you can have a certain setup that really allows for better collaboration with the younger companies, where the bank gets a lot of benefit because it's a lot cheaper to do it through the smaller tech company, because they will be very efficient, because they'll be able to be agile. And so then when you start looking at this setup, what does that actually mean? And so when we started our company, there was a lot of innovation teams. There's a lot of investment in innovation, which is quite interesting, but for RegTech, that's not necessarily always the solution, because if you get an investment from one bank, it could really alienate other banks to start working with you guys as well, which is quite important to keep in mind. But then what we have seen in the past few years that we've been around is that a lot of the people that have been, you know, signing our contracts when we've had nothing, because we were not an IBM or we were a very young company, they're really champions and they're heroes in so many ways, right? They're people who are and should really be cherished by their banks to continue being there. And unfortunately, the turnover and churn for people like that, and the way sometimes they're treated internally, is not the best. And so I think that banks have invested a lot of money into innovation teams, into fantastic initiatives, and then this legacy people, which is what Michael always likes talking about, is something that, you know, really needs to be worked on. So the cultural change, so that you can really allow this setup to work with innovators, is really the bit that I think we need to be having a very, you know, good look at. Because if not, you're basically losing all that passion and all these people internally who work so hard on the side of their jobs in an industry where the churn in general is quite high because people are getting fired all the time. They really need to have the right support system to actually push forward the innovation and to make the cultural change that's needed to really look at technology in the right way.
Thank you. So I talked quite a bit about the role that we've been attempting to play over the last year or two. But I think noting some of the challenges, some of the issues you've called out there, what sort of role do you think going forward the regulator in the UK should start to play or should continue to play? And have you seen anything elsewhere in other jurisdictions that you think in the UK we should seek to emulate or learn from? What do you think we should do next? whoever wants to take that.
I'll kick that one off, shall I? I think, having been engaged with the Reg Sandbox work from almost the very outset, and subsequently with the work that Lawrence Wintermeyer and the Innovate Finance team kicked off on the virtual sandbox, I think that push and that lead has created a conversation in the market that I think has been very important about how do fintechs, regtech, new entrants collaborate with those that exist in the market and have a safe place in which to test and learn. I think coming back to that cultural challenge around not getting fired for instructing IBM, but find yourself in quite a difficult position sometimes when you go, I think that's a great piece of technology, I want to give it a test. Actually, applying the effort and the energy to testing something requires a bit of entrepreneurialism in an organisation, and I think the engagement with the Reg Sandbox, the discussions about how to engage with fintechs and regtechs through the work that Lawrence and Dea did on the virtual sandbox, I think got a good conversation going, it got an important conversation going. I think if that momentum can be kept up, and there are more opportunities to collaborate on some of the big challenges, like KYC and AML, for example, like reg reporting, I think it's a case of continuing to move in the direction that we are.
Yeah, I mean, if we're allowed to encourage the regulator, I think what you've done, and you shared those impressions, and how that's grown over the last year and a half. I would hope that carries on, and the noise, and I mean noise in a positive sense, be it through tech sprints, be it through, your focus group sitting on the stage here, wherever it is, the louder that is heard, the less excuse there is for legacy organizations to hide behind regulation, compliance departments, and others who can, on their bad days, be obstacles to change. So I think what you've done pretty successfully to date is move that conversation to a place where it's not so easy to just say, it wouldn't fly, it couldn't work, it wouldn't be allowed. And I think that, turning up the amplifier on that, on continuing to do that, is it's almost a critical precondition for success.
Yeah, no, I would say that the work the FCA has been doing in particular here in the UK is really to be commended, because it's really generated a whole lot of conversation that is really good and healthy to have inside big companies. And so it's really spurred, I would say, a whole lot of conversations, which is very, very positive. What it could do differently, and what would be great, is to basically get more resources to continue doing that work, because it is a reality that when you look at examples like Singapore, they have gotten all sorts of resources at the regulators to look at all sorts of things, and we probably don't want to be falling behind. And so I think in general, there's just a reality when it comes to business, when it comes to entrepreneurship, is that this is not a charity. You need to actually pay the bills, you need to hire people, you need to grow your SME, you need to scale up, money needs to be spent, right? And so when you look at things that are very real, from an FCA contingency plan that is required from our clients to be careful when they hire a technology to make sure that they're not going to go bust the next year, that's supporting that conversation as much as possible from facts in terms of like money being spent, and not just from a POC perspective or an investment perspective, but from actually buying the software. And that's how all small business companies have grown anyways. IBM was a tiny company at some point as well. So the more the regulator can support that evolution as organically as possible, I think the better there is. And having resources, that are not just in terms of people, but also in terms of, money that they can spend to do more things, it's actually quite important, I would say.
Okay, thanks. Yeah. Sorry, I've been tapped out on time. I'm going to take a burning question if there is one. If not, I think most of us are here for the rest of the day, so you can catch us in the break. Is there any pressing questions from the floor? Wow.
It's a burning question then.
Oh, it's one right down the front, sorry.
Ryan from CNBC. So my burning question is kind of related to the financial crash in 2008, which was already mentioned, and kind of relating to machine learning and AI. And how does the panel think that tools like this and RegTech can maybe avert another crash from happening?
Oh, I think we can prevent the next financial crisis, obviously. That's the ethos of my company. But I would say that what's interesting with AI and machine learning is that there's still a long way to come for that to be usable the way that maybe the setup for the rules are. So it's very hard to use those tools if it's very hard to retrieve certain things through the internet. So one of the conversations we've had with a few regulators, including the FCA, is how do you publish things in a certain way that allows for much more of that to happen? You can really look at a world where if something that's not necessarily the principle-based stuff, but the rules-based stuff, was well published in a way that can be retrieved easily for machine learning and using AI, you could get to something quite interesting where a change in the FCA rulebook could trigger all sorts of changes that are completely digital, all the way to the screen of someone that's basically monitoring that inside a bank or in a technology company that is supposed to be monitoring that on behalf of its clients as well. So there's a lot of opportunities. There's a long way to go, I would say, for that to happen. But obviously, the more these conversations take place and the more the regulators get engaged into changing also their approaches and becoming much more digital, the better it will be.
Okay. Thank you very much to my panel. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you.